who is an associate professor at Penn State in the Department of Civil Engineering and Environmental Engineering. His research mainly focus on hydrology and the interaction with other subsystems like ecosystem, carbon cycles. He also research on water scarcity and conflicts and competitions in different parts of the world, changes in the water cycle. So from that, you can guess like today's talk is about water cycle and water sciences. The title of the talk is Differentiable Modeling for Continental and Global Scale Water Sciences. Um, just to let you know that today's talk will be recorded for those who cannot attend, and so I will not take more time. It's already 4:06. I'm turn the microphone and screen to you. So please welcome Dr. please welcome Dr. Shen.
Chaopeng, Shen. Yep.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank
Thanks.
you.
Yeah, I just started screen sharing. Hope you can see it, right? Uh,
Yep.
yeah. Thanks everyone who attended. I accepted this invitation last time in Baltimore when I was doing this collaboratory of the Chesapeake Bay, and I think yeah, thanks for the invitation. So I'm happy to be here. Yeah, so my name is Chaopeng Shen. I'm uh, basically a water resources person in at civil engineering and at Penn State University. And the title of the talk is Differentiable Modeling for Continental and Global Scale Water Resources. We do put our website, codes and benchmarks and tutorials on our website for many of the things we talked about. Right here, it's compiled. And also we launched a symposium, Big Data Machine Learning in Water Resources Symposium. And you can check it out in hydroml.org. And the third year is going to be in Richland, Washington. Right? I'm also an editor at a new AGU journal of JGR Machine Learning and Computation, and we're welcoming new submissions. It's getting busier and busier now with this new journal. So a little bit about me. I graduated with a PhD from Michigan State University. I did a postdoc at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. I sort of grew up as a process-based modeler solving partial differential equations. So I do see both sides of the story. I sort of got into machine learning since 2016. And at the time, the reason that I got into ML was that, I was doing nerve system modeling and providing, hydrologic component, and we solved lots of equations. And there are so many different teams working together to support a nerve system model. And back at the time, I felt like our level of complexity was sort of spiraling out of control because there are many people who are contributing, and someone changed an aspect here in their model that changes your result, and it's just so hard to diagnose what's wrong. And from to me, like every time we're adding more component, the complexity just grow exponentially. So I was looking for an alternative method. And back then, about the same time, I noticed machine learning, uh, deep learning. I started to working in Honest around it toward the end of 2015-ish, and got seriously into it in 2016 with my grad student. Now it's time flies. Um, I will introduce this concept called differentiable modeling. What it really means is to absorb a good gene from AI into our domains, and that good gene is differentiable programming. And I explain why I think that differentiable modeling is transformative when we combine that good gene of AI with domain knowledge. And I show you many different examples of how well it worked for national and global scale hydrologic modeling, and as well as other types of modeling, right? So I'll talk a little bit about the deep learning in hydrology. Since around 2017-ish, papers have been published on deep learning in water, and we're one of the frontiers in exploring that round. So there are many applications already, but some of the prototypical applications is soil moisture, stream flow, and water quality indicators. And so for soil moisture, you have the satellite that circles around the world and give you data every 2 to 3 days. And you have this grid-like, gridded like data set, right? And on every grid cell, you have like a time series. The other data type is this basin-based data set. So every point here represents a basin. Okay, that's like a upstream catchment of that drains into that gauge. And then we extract sort of the static attributes, like landscape attributes, as well as like forcing time series of forcing data as inputs to the model to predict something else. And this something, the thing that we started messing around with around 2016 was this long short-term memory, LSTM, right? Back the time, we didn't know what to expect out of it, but it turns out it's a highly popular architecture now in water. So essentially, with this framework, you feed in atmospheric forcings, soil texture, slope, etc. These are the landscape attributes. And from LSTM, it outputs something that doesn't have any meaning until you match it with an observation. And at that point, it can't mean soil moisture or stream flow or water quality, etc., etc. And it can be generally written as y equals to deep learning of x comma a, right? So this is actually the first paper in the field of hydrology that leveraged LSTM on a big data set. And until today, the setup is essentially the same. You see that, so essentially, you see that the blue line, which is the LSTM, is trained on that red circle, which is the satellite observation of moisture. So it's trained in 1 year and tested in another year. You see that this is 10 percentile is a high performing pixel. So it captured almost every fluctuation of the red circle. For the 50th percentile, so it's like a medium student in the class per se, we see that it's capturing most of that variations, but it's missing some of these peaks. Overall, over entire continental United States, we get a correlation of higher than 0.9, mostly. So that's actually a lot better than the previous process-based models. At that point, some other colleagues started looking at rainfall runoff modeling, and we also did the same. So you see this curve a lot, right? So this is a cumulative density function of what we call a Nash-Sutcliffe efficiency coefficient. That is basically a curve that's toward the right on the curve. It's a better model, right? So this CDF summarizes the NSE from 671 basins across the United States. So okay. This is for rainfall runoff modeling. So if you read the median, this is a traditional model that has a correlation, has an NSE, median NSE of about 0.64. But when you go to LSTM, it suddenly rose to 0.73-ish, which is a lot higher than the traditional model. So this does tell us that there was a lot of inadequacy or suboptimality with our previous models. And LSTM essentially pointed out these problems. And it leads us to think about what was missing, how can you improve your process, what is the prediction limit given the information that you have. I think that's the positive thing that come out of this. We also realize, we can even use these LSTM to predict sort of mixed human behavior. So what's shown here is still a map of Nash-Sutcliffe coefficient. Nevertheless, this is an expanded data set with more than 3,000 basins that has significant reservoirs. And, long story short, we find that if you have reservoirs, your basin is going to operate very differently from the natural hydrology. So that means if you are assuming reference conditions for a basin that has reservoirs, you will be awful wrong. Okay. Then the other thing that we learned from this is that as long as your basin is not very large, okay, if your basin can store maybe about a month of inflow that flows into the reservoir, we are doing a reasonable job here. We are looking at a median NSE of about 0.8. That's actually a very encouraging number. That means maybe you've exerted significant controls on the hydrology, but as long as you have done it in the past, it's recorded in the data, the LSTM can sort of learn, read from you, and predict what humans are going to do next, right? So that's pretty surprising. However, if you have larger and larger reservoirs that can modulate across different seasons, for example, this type of reservoirs can store almost a year of inflow, then LSTM really is not going to do a very good job there because many other factors come into play. Another gene uh, that I like from AI is that they can manage memory in an implicit form, right? So for example, you can train a model from data extensive regions and migrate it to a data sparse region, and then you can save some data that way. Uh, so this is what we tried here. So we, for example, we trained a model over United States and we transferred it over to Chile, and if you do this thing called transfer learning, in other in a way, basically you freeze the weights, um, and then you can tune some of those different layers. Then it really saves it based on the same amount of data. You do a lot better on the new region. Okay. Um, Another thing that you could do is to supervise these models using multiple different data sources. So this is a multi-scale model where we have a high resolution simulation that is trying to capture soil moisture, right? It's actually matched with in situ data that are like local at the site. Then we coarsen that simulation. We get a low resolution simulation, and we compare that low resolution simulation to satellite data. So this one model is essentially supervised by two sources of information. It's like having two teachers, right? And the what we learned from here is that when we just try to learn from the satellite, that's this green box. This green box is the satellite. On the y-axis, you have the correlation. Okay, so the green box is a satellite. So it has a correlation about 0.7-ish against like in situ measurements. So if you train from that data set, you are not going to exceed the accuracy of that data set because you're going to inherit all the sort of deficiencies of that data set, all the issues, right? So this blue box is an LSTM that is trained on this map data, and it almost like a 99% perfect student, right? So almost there, but like it's 1% below that. This black box is one that learns from in situ data, so its correlation median is 0.82. However, if you learn from both sources, you get this yellow box, which is this multi-scale model, right? So we get that you have a median correlation of 0.9. So it's a distinct improvements over these models. So the moral of the story is if you learn from two teachers, you can actually be better than either one of them. So we can take it, whatever way we want to take. And you can also apply this to a lot of different applications like water quality, the dissolved oxygen or nitrate, sediment, phosphorus. So this whole series of LSTM applications are very popular now. And I did a little bit search like in 2023, there were at least like 1,000 papers using LSTM in hydrology, which is a very big number, right? So I call this whole thing the first phase of deep learning in hydrology. Um, Purely data driven, just to trying to see where the limit is. It's all cool for that purpose, but we still feel like there's significant limitations, right? So these models are not interpretable, partly because there's no physical concepts, right? For these supervised machine learning, like it's a direct linkage from X to Y, and we don't understand it because there's no physical concepts in between, and it probably intertwines 20 different processes. uh, Therefore we cannot decipher what relationship was learned. And these LSTM can also give you what is known as the good results for the wrong reason, right? In this sense, it could give you good prediction for the wrong sensitivity. So overall, in the known Earth, it does a good job making predictions. But if you alter some of these conditions, assuming climate change, it may not reflect your sensitivity correctly. And we know this because we tried um, like land use. We can even remove land use from the input and you will get an equally powerful model that doesn't need land use information, right? So that means maybe it doesn't interpret the land use and sensitivity correctly. It also might have challenges with respect to unseen cases or data scarce regions. And logically, because these models are implicit, they don't have physical concepts. Logically, it cannot answer specific questions because for you to ask a specific question, it needs the logic support of the physical concepts, right? When you don't have those physical concepts, how can you ask a specific question, right? So we think there's very positive development, but there's also limitations with purely data machine training, purely data-driven methods, right? So the next thing that I was thinking about is how can we absorb sort of the best aspects of machine learning without taking its whole form. And when I look at what is good about machine learning, I think these are the good genes, what I call. The large depth and ends, they can emulate highly complex functions, right? That's good. So the various tricks like mini batches and high concurrency GPU computing, they give you a high data throughput. That's good. Differentiable programming is the programming paradigm that allows you to get the gradients of every single operation, and you can then go back and do end-to-end training of these large neural networks. That is good. So all of this allows us to learn a robust and universal relationships from big data, and these are good things. But it doesn't mean that we have to take the machine learning algorithms in their full form if we want these things. Okay, we can take these things, but not take the exact forms. Okay, so when you think a little bit more about the similarity and differences between process-based models and deep learning, we can write purely data-driven machine learning models as y equals to a function g with weights w, given some states u, some forcing x, and attribute a, right? And then we confront that model with observations y star, and we tune that matrix w, right? But we've been doing this for process-based models for a long time. We have process-based models, written almost in the same form. Written as a function f, given the same inputs with some parameters data, and you calibrate those parameters against observations, right? So this is almost the same at this level. So what is different? So after some thinking, I realized the main difference is the magnitude between W and theta. The W for our LSTM that we're training can be somewhere between 500,000 to 1 million weights. For something like some gigantic models like ChatGPT, it can be over 1 trillion weights, right? And then Microsoft is doing something like 56 trillion weights. Whereas how many parameters can we train from a traditional model? 12 was considered high dimensional, right? And the core thing that allowed these differences in the magnitudes is this ability to rapidly compute gradients of the loss function or whatever the downstream output is of the output with respect to an input into that model, right, or a parameter into that model. So this, in the context of AI, is normally supported by automatic differentiation. And basically you write your model forward and it knows how to track everything that you need to go when it goes backward, right, to do the back propagation. However, in the context of PD constraint optimization, you can also do something like a joint state method, where you solve a different equation that gives you the gradient, that it alters the order of the calculation so that even for a highly complex partial differential equation, the cost of doing this is affordable. So by thinking this through, we started experimenting with an idea where we are using the NN to actually produce neural network, to produce parameters for our process-based models. So this is called differentiable parameter learning. And I want you to look at this framework here, where we have some static attribute that feeds into a neural network, and that neural network outputs some parameter theta, and that parameter, we don't have any direct supervision for them. We don't have any observations of these parameters. Or if you do, you can be provided as a secondary constraint. But most of the time, we don't have it. However, no problem. We feed it into a model, and that model is a process-based model. If it's differentiable, that works, okay? Or if it's not differentiable, you can have a surrogate model That's a neural network that then is differentiable, and that model outputs something else that gets compared with the loss function, gets compared with the data to produce the loss function. And then we can back propagate from the loss function through that model, through this parameter to supervise this neural network, okay? So in that way, we are able to achieve a high data throughput, learning from big data. In other words, all those good genes that I mentioned in the past. But this is a very distinct paradigm. This is a very distinct framework from the traditional, from the typical, supervised machine learning paradigm, right? So we are showing here under these maps are um, the one of the parameters outputted by this neural network. Notice, because now it's differentiable, we are able to learn from the data of the entire domain, okay? And every single point in this domain constrains this one single neural network, right? So that means one guy is serving not only me, but also my neighbor. So there's some implicit spatial constraint. That gives rise to this spatial pattern where you have high values near the coast and low values in the more arid regions of the United States. And that is exactly what you expect to see for this parameter, okay, this infiltrating capacity parameter for this model called VIC. Now, if you use a traditional optimization algorithm like shuffle complex evolutionary algorithm, it's a very traditional, standard optimization algorithm, right? Evolutionary algorithm. So for that particular algorithm, because that it cannot handle high data throughput, it is not intended for absorbing so many points at the same time. Okay, it does not use the gradient information, so it works on each point, point by point, and it's independent from each other, right? That means every point has nothing to do with each other, and that's why you get this big jumbled mix, because the parameters are by default, what they call over-parameterized, and they're not unique, and you run into this non-uniqueness problem, so that the optimum parameter can be anywhere in the parameter space, and they're compensating each other, right? So in doing this global training, this global domains-wide training, I think we avoided one of the biggest problem in traditional modeling. So it's also very promising that when we do that, we gain a lot of other benefits. We benchmark these two data set with these two methods. Long story short, going from green to blue to red, we are given more and more training data. And on the x-axis, you see the computational time per grid cell. On the y-axis, you see the root mean squared error of the main. That's the main calibration objective. So we notice that with the traditional methods, which are these dashed lines, as you increase the amount of data, it does not respond, right? Because every point is independent. However, when you give more data to this differentiable parameter learning scheme, we see that it becomes more and more efficient. It gets below this threshold faster and faster. In fact, orders of magnitude faster in terms of computational time per grid cell. This is because, in a way, I do not have, for one, because one neural network serves all the points. It's like one technician learns to fix all the houses. If the technician learns how to fix my house, he pretty much knows how to fix my neighbor's houses, because it's a very similar problem, right? So in this new way, in this big data way, we're leveraging into that commonality, right? So you get this sort of network effect that the more points joins, the better it is, the more efficient it is for each point. And so it scales very favorably with data, and it's orders of magnitude more efficient. So this is actually hard, a little difficult at the beginning when this paper was introduced for scientists to understand. As the number we quote is that the traditional approach for this problem would require like 100 processor run for 2 or 3 days. However, with the DPL approach, we only need one GPU, you run it for 2 or 3 hours, right? It's a tremendous difference. It's an orders of magnitude difference. And I don't have the time to show it today, since it's not going to be centric on this paper, that we also get better results for those untrained variables that are also output by the numerical model, right? Because it outputs various things. We train on one of the variable, and we use the DPL, we find that the other variables are also becoming better. We also have better spatial generalization. And all of that is because we are now training over the entire domain and we are leveraging into the spatial constraint. And the most important thing that guarantees these benefits is differentiable programming that allows us to train on a lot of data. Okay. So we find this to be a fantastic avenue forward. So we generalize this into differentiable modeling in geosciences. What it is a seamless mixture between neural networks and process-based equations. Okay. So now we're able to kind of cut this uh, entire learning into multiple different pieces. And maybe for 6 of these 8 equations, you say, oh, I believe these equations. There's mass balance, right? I believe them. Or there's some, evaporative laws that I trust. Then you write the equations for them. And then we can then say, oh, those 2 equations, I don't trust them. I throw them out and I replace them using neural networks. Right? And then we train those neural networks along with the rest of the framework. So here, G1, for example, represent a parameterization method. And what that is demonstrated here. So we have, for example, some static attributes and forcing data that goes into a neural network. And that neural network outputs either static or dynamic parameters that feeds into this process-based model. And we set these parameters to be optionally dynamic because it can offset or compensate for some of the missing processes in your process-based model. But this process-based model serves as sort of an overall structure or backbone per se. And it describes all these processes such as, snowfall, evapotranspiration, base flow, and the soil water storage. So, and then the key idea is to train this whole framework on big data. And these equations that you explicitly write, you can say they are the priors, and these priors constrain the learning to an interpretable scope. What I mean by that is these neural networks are forced to produce what the upstream and downstream equations require. Right? These equations mandate that you produce certain things for the whole model to make sense. So in a way, they are forced to produce a smaller relationship that we can understand and make sense of. Okay, so that actually gives us a systematic way to grow our model. I say that, we now see that our process-based models are these, harmless little dragons that when you couple it with the differentiable parameter learning, it's like a human-sized dragon that you feel like it's a bit menacing, but you should feel like you can take it, right? But if we leverage this approach to further evolve our model and improve the structural aspects of it, then it evolves into this gigantic dragon that is very, very powerful. And that's what's coming here in this paper. And we think why is differentiable modeling transformative? Because it's able to learn universal laws from big data. And I want you to look at this figure here, and it's still the CDF. You now get by now you're familiar with this. So this black curve represents a traditional model. This red curve represents our differentiable parameter learning scheme plus a traditional model that doesn't have structural update yet. Okay, so it's what I call those that human-sized dragon, right? And then the green line here is the LSTM, still the big guy in town. So it's toward the right. So I want you to see this purple line. This purple line is our evolved process-based model, our differentiable model. Okay, so it's very similar to that green line now. Okay, it's very, very similar. So it has high predictive accuracy because it now has neural networks that can learn and update from and learn and adapt to big data. So it has high predictive performance. However, it's also able to maintain that physical concepts. So because these models have this structure, right? It has this different structure. It describes these processes. So we ask a question, do these variables still make sense? The answer is that they do. So we compared the simulated base flow with the base flow that's extracted from another way. So if you're not familiar, base flow means the amount of groundwater that the amount of stream flow that's contributed by groundwater. So essentially, we have a high correlation between the simulated base flow fraction and the base flow extracted through another method. We also compared simulated evapotranspiration with another alternative source of observation from the MODIS satellite data. And we see that after we do the data learning, this ET component actually has a high correlation with the observations, has median 0.85. This even improved from the original physically based model. So it tells us these physical terms still make sense. They still maintain what they were supposed to maintain. So that's a very exciting thing for us, because now you have these physical variables, they can be interpreted, right? You have the concept to support your interpretation. And then the differentiable modeling is also transformative because it is very strong at extrapolation. So we ran these experiments where we divided the whole United States into 7 folds on a regional basis. So we trained the model on, let's just say, 6 of these regions and tested in one of these regions. So this is a very strong extrapolation case because this region is like 2 times of Germany, right? It's almost like flying blind. You go and you make a prediction in a large region without any data. Um, so in that sense, in this PUR, what we call prediction and ungauged region test, we see that the differentiable models, which are these, are actually higher than LSTM, okay? Because now this differentiable model has a physical backbone to kind of prop itself up when there's not enough data to supervise the model. So it has something to fall back on. And we look at, predicting long-term trend, and also still for this PUR experiment, we see that we get an annual trend of r squared equal to 0.64. That's LSTM, but the differentiable model actually has an r squared of 0.88. That means that model is actually better at describing these long-term trends. And we see from these points, we see that LSTM tends to kind of duck down. It tends to kind of undershoot the trend going forward. And that's not surprising because it tends to not predict a hugely wetting trend if it has never seen that kind of wetness before, right? Whereas the process-based model, because it has a physical backbone, it is forced to do that no matter how extreme that situation is. So we overcome some of the limitations from the data-driven machine learning model. And this same analysis applies both in the CONUS dataset or the global data set. We did the same experiment in South America and Europe, and the same pattern is seen. Okay, so in order to kind of push forward about differentiable modeling, we also solved some of the core challenges. For example, in our traditional models, right, we have explicit scheme, implicit scheme to solve some of the, and implicit scheme are typically used to solve some of the stiff problems, and you need those schemes, and they're good, right? Sometimes the implicit scheme means you have to solve a system of equations simultaneously, so your solution at the same time satisfy a system of equations, right? And that's a good thing. But this sort of iterative schemes is going to consume too much GPU memory, so it's not going to work very well for a differentiable modeling. So in order to solve this problem, we can implement a discrete, what is called a discretize then optimize adjoint method. So within a joint method, you would alter the order of the calculations so that the memory and the memory and the computational demand are greatly reduced, and we do not keep track of the gradients when the model is trying to iterate and trying to find convergence. So we only keep track of it until after convergence. Okay, so that saves the memory tremendously, and that means that all forms of implicit schemes can now be applied in differentiable modeling. We also think differentiable modeling is transformative because it allows us to make very specific inquiries. So for example, here we have rainfall runoff relation that says that the runoff ratio is a power law function of soil moisture over field capacity raised to some exponent beta. And that has always been assumed in this model. Now we're saying, oh, I don't trust it. I'm throwing it out. I'm going to replace it with a neural network and relearn that neural network along with the rest of the model. And these red points are what is produced by this trained neural network. Okay, and the blue line is this previously assumed relationship, this power law relation. It looks very smooth, right? But the ANN gives a very different picture. What we see here is that for many of these basins, it tends to do these thresholded behavior. This threshold behavior actually kind of maps to a concept in hydrology called fuel and spill. So it fills the tank up to a certain extent, and then overspill happens. So you have this threshold-like behavior. The other thing is that the precipitation should be part of the function, but the original formula ignored it. We know that already, but this model didn't have it, so it should be there. The other thing is it can reaches the peak way earlier than the power law. So the power law, only rise until like 0.7-ish, it start to rise. But we see in all of these models, it tends to rise way earlier than this, right? So the neural networks allows us to make a very specific inquiry about a component, and it allows us to kind of make sense of it because now you have physical concepts. So this method is called a knowledge discovery, and it helps us to identify part of the system given partial assumptions elsewhere. And actually, this figure shows, remember previously I said that, differentiable modeling is almost where the LSTM is. Now with this newer version, we are actually doing almost exactly the same as the LSTM. So this green line is actually one of our elite version of LSTM. It actually compares favorably to this black line, which is one of the LSTM versions used in the community. And the adjoint method, actually, once we solve that adjoint problem, that implicit scheme problem, we know that it actually overlapped with the LSTM all the way until the median. It doesn't do very well here. It starts to kind of split from here. And the reason is we start to get into precipitation bias. And those biases causes, because the model respects mass balance, when you do not give it enough precipitation, it cannot produce enough runoff. So I don't blame the model at this point, and it means that we need to fix another aspect of it. Okay. But that is, precipitation. So what can differentiable model brings to global hydrologic modeling? In summary, it learns from global multivariate data all around improving our global hydrologic models. It output detailed processes, and I think this would apply to the glacier modeling as well. It basically, when you don't have as much data, you can constrain more parts of that model as explicit formula and learn just a smaller part of it, right? We can learn unknown physics to improve equations and assumptions systematically. We can improve parameterization. We can have robust extrapolation in space because you have a structure to fall back on. And it can well represent long-term trends. It can also do data simulation because it has gradients, and we can do this optimization method called variational data simulation that is actually more effective than something like ensemble common filtering. Then it can correct the forcings. So it's there's a lot of benefits. So we started. So I think this is probably of less relevance to you folks. But here, what I wanted to say is that our model demonstrated very strong performance compared to a previous version of this national water model. Okay, so this national water model, this paper was just published in 2023. And this is the national water model. It's with a lot of effort that can come up with this. But you see that we are pushing a lot of these points from here to here. So we're pushing the NSE higher, and you can see the way that it's concentrated toward this well-behaving range of the metrics plane. Okay, it is also highly applicable, widely applicable to different problems. So, for example, you can try to apply to glacier modeling, I guess, but here we apply to like ecosystem modeling, and the framework is similar. So we have neural networks that output parameters for a photosynthesis model. And this model simulate net photosynthesis as well as like conductance or VC max 25, and we can constrain all of those aspects. So we basically train these neural networks to produce better parameters. So actually, what it learned, this allows us to greatly revise the photosynthesis. I mean, we're trying to this is a relatively new results, and we're trying to wrap up, I think, hopefully a high impact journal, because based on this new learning, we realize that the global photosynthesis might have been overestimated in the past, by almost like 10%. And the global photosynthesis is like the biggest term in the carbon cycle. Right? So it's a big error, to say the least, based on very rigorous cross-site comparison. Okay, then we actually learned this relationship. This actually represents how the this VC max 25 parameter varies as a function of the environmental variable. So essentially, what it means is, um, we have a vegetation. The vegetation would behave differently. If it's the same type of vegetation, it would behave differently under a different environment. Okay, the same orange tree you planted in Africa versus you planted in Asia, it would behave differently because it adapts to that environment. And this, by learning from data, we're extracting that environment, that data, that pattern, and a lot of these patterns seem to make sense. And you can, to kind of prove to you about the generality of the differentiable modeling paradigm, it's also being applied to river routing and stream quality. So with our differentiable modeling paradigm, we're able to simulate massive scale stream routing problems. So to further understanding, this whole figure for Mississippi Basin has more than 1 million edges. So it's a huge graph neural network that we can actually train on. So it's a kind of a miracle that we can even do that because of the some of the methods that we applied. And so we're getting this is a very rapid development phase. We're seeing changes every day to improve like large scale routing. So this same framework can be leveraged to model riverine processes, how things are changing, how chemicals are evolving in rivers. And we applied this on a global scale. Like I showed you, it's a global scale model now. It took a lot of effort to build the basis for it. um, we compare it with a lot of the other alternative models, and we see that this blue circles are our model, and it's concentrating toward the target of 1.0. So being closer to this target, the better, right? And amongst all of these all of these rivers, we see that this blue circle, which is our differentiable model, are closer to the target than the other alternative models in the past. And I think we're actually rapidly iterating on this, and this should get a lot better actually down the road. Uh, and we can also use it to correct our forcings, because the forcings is part of the system, and it can be corrected because we have gradients, okay? And we can actually merge different forcing data set to get a better forcing data set. And, with that, I hope with that we've demonstrated the power of differentiable modeling. And by the way, the thing you see here is a foundation model, but I don't get the time to talk about it, but it's an exciting result. It's a different thing, right? It's different from this. Anyway, I could end here and see if any folk has questions.
Thank you very much for the nice talk. It's very interesting. So I'm sure we have some questions. So if you have any question, please ask her. It's a good time. We have like 10 more minutes to discuss with Dr. Shen. Any question? Well, if
Hello, Dr.
yeah, right. Oh,
Hello, Dr. Shen. Thank you for the nice talk. I have just questions like here. So far, I recall you try to basically like combine the physics model and the machine learning together, right?
Yeah.
Some of the algorithm. So one of the challenge here maybe come like how to design the regularizer or loss function. How you like overcome these issues? Will you please elaborate more?
So, yeah, let me explain a little bit more, because you might have heard about, physics guided machine learning that modifies the loss function, etc., etc. This is
Hmm.
not that. This
Yes,
is
yes.
not. It's not that.
Okay,
So
okay.
here, these structures, they do not live in the loss function. Okay, they do not live in the loss function. They are part of your model. They're part of your model, just like so for example, when we write the model in PyTorch, this whole neural network is in PyTorch, right? And then we're going to translate that component of the model also into PyTorch. Okay, because it's written in PyTorch, it supports automatic differentiation. So you get a lot of that processes. The automatic differentiation will leads to the gradients to be able to go back to train this neural network. Okay, and if you have like a implicit numerical model, like I said, then you can use the adjoint method that is possible. Various different packages offer that. But the main idea is that the gradients would pass through these different elements in the model. So you can almost perceive it from two parts, two aspects. You can perceive this physical model as a layer of neural network. Okay? A layer of neural network. Or you can perceive this machine learning as a sort of a fancy parameter generator, right? So you can see it from both sides because these two are now seamlessly coupled. They're all supported with differentiable programming. So you can put a neural network anywhere in the system. Okay, you can replace processes, you can replace the parameter generator, or you can replace any part of the model. So this whole structure is not in the loss function. Okay, that's number one. Number two, the loss function for these cases are simply, you have to sort of, there's some options for you, right? So we tried, mean squared error, of course, root mean squared error, or we have something called Nash-Sutcliffe efficiency coefficient. So we do like a 1 minus that NSE. So all of those are fine, are possible.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Shen. Just one quick questions, like you have coded in the just one GPU or multiple GPU, like parallelization?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, in fact, this original code was just running on one GPU, and a GPU is like it has like thousands of cores on it, right? So
Yes.
that's very cool. However, we now have newer versions that can run on multiple GPUs.
Okay. Oh, okay. It will support the parallelization, right? So it will more
Yeah,
faster.
it supports distributed data parallelism,
Okay.
or it can. We have not gotten to the point where we need to load the model on different parts of a GPU. If you train something like a large language model, you have to load them. They're getting too big, and you can load different layers onto different GPUs, and we didn't have to play those tricks because the magnitude of the magnitude of the computation or the number of weights here are not at that scale yet.
Okay. Okay. Got it. Thank you. Thank you for the nice
Yeah, thanks
presentation.
for the good question. Yeah.
Any other question?
Yeah, I have a quick question. That was a great talk, by the way. I think I find myself a little bit like you. I was trained as a physical modeler. I'm an ice sheet modeler. So, process-based and everything. And slowly I'm being interested in using neural networks. And it seems to me that in this world of unified machine learning and physical models, Julia is like the new language that people are looking into, because the problem with Python is great, but it's slow when it comes to large scale modeling. And I was wondering what your thoughts were, because for me, because this is all new to me, I'm free
So
to use
have
whatever
you
language.
gotten into the Julia world?
A little bit, yeah.
Okay. I actually. So you're right. We can use Julia. We can use TensorFlow. We can use PyTorch or JAX. All of these libraries would support differentiability in different ways, and they have different characteristics. So I think all of them are legitimate. The core idea is to have differentiability, and is how you compute the adjoint, right? For some numerical methods, if you want to solve like an arbitrary differential equation, so the Julia package, I know we're probably talking about the scientific machine learning package. it would have a good support for lots of different solver options. So we chose PyTorch, and we chose to almost implement our own solvers, partly because I want to understand what goes into the solvers. Because when I actually, in 2021, I was in Switzerland doing my sabbatical, and I spent a good 4 months trying to understand the SIML package, trying to use it for my case. The thing is, I have several requirements. One is it has to have high parallelism. Like I said, this is the #1 criteria. If it does not support parallelism on the GPU, it would not work. It will not permit me to get high data throughput and learn from all the data and then all the good things of the good gene. Right? So we have to guarantee that. So I think at that time they had so much challenge with that. They had so much challenge supporting parallel solving on the GPU, and they even helped me. They even helped me to get one code through, and it was just so hard. It was just so hard. But now, 3 years later, things might have changed. And back then, I just could not have the time to wait for that development. So we chose to, in a way, when I debug into the Julia code, I could not understand it, because the reason is they try, I understandably, they're trying to support all kinds of solution schemes, right? So they're bundling a lot of things across many different interfaces. And so when I debug into it, I could not, it's probably my own limitation. I could not understand when an algorithm is called. How can I control some algorithms? Like how can I ensure that my data is running in parallel on the GPU? So that's, and some of the algorithms, because for our, rainfall runoff modeling, we can do it explicitly or implicitly. We can take small steps, or we can run Runge-Kutta. So all that is handled to the ODE solver and tries to grant through that by itself. But I know that, I want control over that. I want control over, what actually numerical scheme is applied. And that's not so easy. When I debug, then I have trouble understanding it. So that's why I didn't go down that path. I've seen other friends who made it work, but they also have problem making it parallel down the road. But now, in PyTorch, you have something called torch diff EQ that does like a similar role, and it is also quite parallel. And you can do something like JAX, which is some very efficient. So I don't want to talk about too much deep into that. One of the cases I ran with our hydrologic model, I wrote both versions, exact same computation and just exact same compute on calling CUDA. They're both calling CUDA, right? So by the end of the day, the PyTorch or JAX or Julia, they're both calling CUDA libraries. And it turns out that in that application, it's just straightforward computation. Okay, straightforward computation, true. It turns out that the Julia wasn't faster than my PyTorch code. I don't know. It's sort of maybe part of my own limitation, So that's why we didn't go down that path.
Thank you. No, that's very helpful. I experienced the same issues, that Julia is not quite yet mature enough for large scale studies.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's my feeling in 2021, and I sort of jumped ship at that time. But I'm not saying they might be better now. Like the main thing about machine learning is you have to confront it with big data, right? That's the whole purpose. If we cannot confront it with big data, then we lost that whole purpose. And the other thing is, of course, being an open source project, you are relying on this library and that library, and maybe some of the libraries don't work, and you kind of are at the mercy of the developers to fix some things, and they have their priorities. And you have to make yourself like a developer to make this work. And I just, as a faculty, I just couldn't have the time, and I couldn't expect my students to figure it out either. So it was a bit challenging, but I hope that the landscape improved.
Sorry, I don't understand.
That was Siri responding to me.
Any other question? When we were 5 p.m. started late. I mean, if you have any other question, well, if not, I have a small question. I mean, trying to understand your model. So, is it like you're using the neural network to parameterize the equations?
Yeah, so you could think of this as a parameterization function. So the parameterization function means from some observable traits, okay? For example, land cover, geology, soil, forcing. It assumes that there exists a relationship between your parameters and these traits, right? And it's a generic relationship that can be generalized across the whole domain. That's the core assumption of this differentiable parameter learning approach. Okay, then we tried this on very different problems. It seems like it always could find some useful relationships, and it's then this parameter, then you feed it into these process-based models that use these parameters, but there's no ground truth for these parameters, right? You just use it, and it does a bunch of process-based calculations. It outputs something else that gets compared with the observations, and you can proceed. To do a back propagation.
So, how big is that? Like the physics-based model? Is it like a CLM kind of, or much more smaller than that?
Yeah, that's a good question. Let me respond. So the model that we tried here is quite simple. It's called HBV. It's quite simple. In fact, it can be written in 40 lines of code, even 20 if we make it succinct. So this is quite simple. However, in our lab, we have attempted different models already. We have attempted photosynthesis model, which you can say that it's not larger, but we're now adding more components to it. We have attempted on river routing model. This is a more complex model. Okay, it has a lot more network connectivity that is involved. So there's quite a lot of work here. And there's also a water quality module that has water temperature as well as some other components that is linked to the hydrology model. That more and more that goes in the direction of a land, that looks more and more like a land surface model. It has more processes. If you bring, and we haven't brought the vegetation part together with the hydrology part, but if we do that, they will look like a land surface hydrologic model, right? I think that could happen in the future. In fact, the limitation that you run into might be the memory on the GPU, which is a valuable asset, right? Now, if you really get serious and you're bottlenecked by GPU memory, you can do what the AI community do, who distribute their workload onto tens of thousands of GPUs at that time, right? If you're rich enough to get that, right? So I think that so far the process-based models are not consuming that much memory. They're not consuming that because the equations, although they're tensors, they are not tunable, right? They're not tunable. They don't have required grad equal to true, so they don't need to record a lot of a lot of information. So so you can. I know that there is development work from Columbia University that essentially tries to make the whole Earth system model differentiable. They are doing that, and they have translated more subroutines than we did, and that's good. I think that of course we take a more stepwise approach where every step you can confront it with some data. But I think what they have demonstrated that is that you can do this computationally.
Got it.
Yeah.
Thank you. So it's very interesting talk.
Yeah. Thanks for the questions.
I think I may have more questions. I'll circle you back with your email. And so yeah, Ganesh has a question. I mean, so 505. I mean, we can take one more.
Yeah, Ganesh, go ahead. I thought,
Yeah. Sorry, I couldn't figure out the mute option. So yeah, that was a great take earlier, Chaopeng. So yeah, and in one of the results, I don't exactly remember on which of the paper it was, but so the question was, yeah, when comparing your differentiable learning best results relative to the LSTM, I mean the original LSTM formulation, there was still some catching up to do, which I mean in your later results towards the end, I mean they're coming closer and closer, but in that particular one, that there was still some I mean making up to do. So I mean by that, what I was trying to understand was, I mean, are there some insights that we can gain in terms of which processes representation, for example, that we still needed to overcome in bridging that gap?
absolutely. And I think that's a major part of this exercise is to understand which equations are correct, right?
Mhm.
In fact, we do have a paper and where we show that different priors are different. And so if you assume one set of equation compared to another set of equations, even though both of them are connected to neural networks, they can have different outcomes. That means these priors they matter, which necessarily means that some priors are better than the others. So if your priors are not the optimum, then you're not going to be where the LSTM is, right?
Yeah.
That is both good and bad. The good is that it allows you to identify good priors from bad priors. So in a way, you can learn which assumptions are better, right? Which equations are more realistic. So I think that's a good news because it tells us, gives us a signal about what is good and bad. The bad news is that it takes more effort to train and tune such a model to the level of the machine learning. Because you have to get some equations correct, you can tune different parts of the equation. So when we bring the thing of when we bring back the process-based equations, you bring back some of its issues, right? You bring back if you have some limitations, you bring them back. So you gain some, you lose some. So that is reflected in the chart that I showed. So in 2022, we have this version that is just a little bit different from LSTM. In 2023, we have a paper where they are almost overlapped exactly. They overlapped exactly. And that is because we solved the numerical accuracy issue. That is because we have a implicit numerical solver that doesn't use threshold function anymore. That seems to have better directed the gradients. And it's a difference between a rough, crude, thresholded thing to control, the models don't blow up versus a very, completely solved system. So the second is better, but it comes with a higher computational cost. But the challenge is, of course, when you bring back the equations, you are at an advantage in interpretation, but you are at a disadvantage in terms of development speed, right? So there's more work to do, and give you the same test. Can you beat a 13-year-old who runs a model, who runs a deep learning neural network model with a lot of data? It'll take you longer to get there. I believe it's possible. We're showing all these examples. It's possible to get exactly where the ML is. But essentially, I say is you have a human mind, but you have these mechanical parts that serve you, right? The neural networks now, they serve a supporting role. They're like your mechanical arms, right? So you can be as good as neural network that way. However, it takes more effort.
Exactly. I agree with you.
That
And
wasn't bad. When you're trying to race, when you're trying to race with somebody to get on a scoreboard, that's when it really does matter.
Yeah. And yeah, I'm glad that we're bridging that gap and then moving towards more like physics guided approach. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shane. I mean, your talk was so interesting. Like we had like more than 20 minutes of question and answers. I'm sure like people have more. If you have more questions, please feel free to email Dr. Shane. And I'd like to thank you, Dr. Shane, for the nice talk. And we learned a lot, and it was very, very interesting. Thank you very
Thank you
much.
so much for the nice invitation, nice words. Thanks.
Thank you.